we never plan this stuff. It just all kind of flows out.
Yeah, that worked out really well.
What we say to each other cannot be divisive.
Gosh, I just think that when we get so focused on walking the line and just miss so much of God's creativity.
We only created the Odd Show to have this conversation.
Right.
We're gonna say some bad things about stuff. If you're
Not bad things like,
if you're a huge Toby Mac
turn it off now.
For people who are struggling with why would a God of the universe care about me individually, you are his favorite. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is The Odd Show. Let's get right into it. Here's your hosts, Bruce Bugano and Thomas Hogan. Hey, welcome to The Odd Show. I'm Bruce.
And I'm Thomas.
So we've already had one episode this season. This is week 2. This is episode 2, and this episode is going to be part of our previously what we called in last episode we called it the personal realm or the personal arc, but really that wasn't as inclusive to the topics that we wanted to discuss as we wanted it to be. So we're going to call it life space stuff, like stuff that we should and we are dealing with, not just us, but everyone's dealing with kind of on this personal level that affects the life space that
right. I like if we can reference the last time we talked about heart space, home space, life space.
Right.
But I think that's what it encompasses, that full, more than ministry, more than your just your family. This is the outward expression and all the stuff that goes along with it. So
right.
So when I think of church and everything else, it's really just life space stuff.
So this life space stuff, maybe stuff that like you're personally dealing with right now, and maybe stuff that you're just not dealing with, and maybe you don't deal with, but maybe it's something you never even thought of before.
Yeah, definitely something you should probably start at least considering as we bring up these topics.
So, and I think that's the goal is some of the stuff we're going to talk about now. Like maybe it's something that you've never thought about, but hopefully this will kind of spur that. And we've talked a little bit about like growth as a Christian and whatnot. So today, the topic of discussion is going to be marginal and margin and marginal.
Right, margin and marginal.
Right, and kind of work through that. So
and most likely everybody, if you've been to a conference, any kind of leadership conference, any kind of personal development, professional development stuff, the idea of margin is already on your radar because it's talked about a lot in the professional space, definitely in the church world space. They talk about creating margin in your life, creating room at the edges for important things that aren't necessarily the thing that you have to do, say for your job, for your ministry, for your family, but there needs to be room for things to fit in that extra room for that stuff, and that's typically what we mean by margin.
Right, and usually it's directed towards like the things that are important to you.
Right.
Like you feel.
So if you're not working out because you're at the job all the time, and then when you're not at the job, you're taking kids to soccer. When you're not taking kids to soccer, you're working on the next program whatever at church and you're not going to the gym. They're saying create margin for you. So that you can focus on your life and your health, and definitely go to the gym it doesn't have to be 3 hours, but go to the gym for 45 minutes or spend some time in yoga or whatever it is that people are doing now. Hot yoga, I hear that's a thing that people are into. So that's what they mean by margin. They mean create space for you, time for your efforts and your energy.
And all the talk about like you gotta learn to say no. Like it's healthy to say no. Mm-hmm. No's okay.
Which I agree with.
I agree with too.
I'm on that.
I agree with too. But it's usually directed around say no to these things so you can say yes to these things that most often benefit you. I know there's some people out there like you say no to things that people want you to do so you can say yes to the things that are important to you and the people that are important to you. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like,
no.
There's nothing wrong
I'm all for that. Really what I want to get to with this topic is how self-centered and selfish we can be. Not that we are, because you may be doing a really good job of this, but if you're creating space in your life that's just for your pursuits or your if you're at your wit's end, you should probably be cutting some things out.
Right.
Not adding more responsibility to yourself, right? And really, when I'm saying create margin in your life, I'm saying create margin for people, create margin for those who need you. I would say needs a strong word. Those who you can be a benefit and a blessing to, right? That's the margin I'm talking about. That it's not just margin for you to be balanced, because if that's the case, honestly, church people are known for this. You've taken on too much already. If you're at a place where you're like, I don't have room for me. I don't have room to sit down and think through and pray and meditate, and you've gone too far. You don't have room to make margin for you. You definitely don't have room to make margin for other people. And I think that Jesus, when we talk about the way Jesus formatted his ministry here on earth, when he was with the disciples, it was a constant room for margin. He wasn't looking for, he found time for himself, by himself, when he went away from the crowds and went away and prayed, and they said, he would be praying off by himself somewhere. He found room for himself, but his daily activity in ministry it's not what we would consider ministry today. It was constantly finding marginal people in marginal situations and putting them into that space. So where normally, he's at where today, and I'm not saying anything bad about these people, but normally today as a leader in a movement, so say you're the pastor of a church or the president of an organization, your job is to go schmooze and to go highlight this opportunity with the up and coming ministers in your area, or go spend time with the mayor or the governor, whenever, you know what I mean?
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders in your ministry, and to effectively do what you. But Jesus isn't out there trying to get the leaders of the Sanhedrin in his sermons. He's like avoiding them, not in a bad way, but his focus is this marginalized sect of Samaritans. Or prostitutes or tax collectors. And so Jesus is looking for this marginalized category of people that are easily swept aside, easily forgotten, easily left out, and bringing them into his space that he's created, and almost to the detriment of what people would expect, which is to make room for the high ranking and the influential and the important.
Because that's where change happens.
Right. And so that's really what the broader picture is. So to get to that, I want to talk a little bit about, so I remembered what we were talking about yesterday whenever we were kind of developing this. When I was young, I was in a very marginalized part of society. I grew up in the projects. We moved a few blocks away from the projects when I turned 9. And I grew up in a very poor neighborhood with very poor circumstances. And I never felt in school, in social functions, and even though I had friends that I grew up with that were, we were all kind of in the same category or same space as far as being in poverty and not having a lot of healthy moral structures around us and good guidance. We all kind of experienced the same stuff, but even in that environment, I still didn't feel a part or I was a part of that group, that I belonged to that group. And as I grew older, I felt more and more awkward, and that had very little to do with the structures around me, and very much to do with me, how I looked at myself and how I felt. And then I get put in these situations where I didn't know how to be, right? But when it came to church, and I didn't go to church, I didn't grow up in the church. I grew up exposed to church in some ways, but really it was more of that's also a place where I didn't feel like I belonged. And when I was 12, almost 13, my best friend invited me to this church, and in this church setting, and it was a very weird feeling for me. It made sense what they were talking about. It was like a lot of philosophy, and most kids my age didn't care about philosophy at all. And then I felt myself. I felt, okay, this is where I belong. This is I fit here. Now, even though it wasn't necessarily the people, it was the environment, it was the topic. This Pastor B, shout out to Brett Black, who's just an amazing minister and a man of God that kind of helped me become who I would become later in life. He he made room for how marginalized I felt, how little in the society or a part of the broader society I felt. He made me feel not just like I was a part, but he made me feel special. Like that was special about me, and he pulled me into this other world, right, and expanded my horizons. And that, you know, kind of was this directive moment in my life that opened me up, right? And I feel like as Christians, it's sometimes easier to, you know, I know as a leader, for instance, you find somebody that's charismatic, energetic, enthusiastic, passionate, and you're like, that person attracts you because of their potential to be leaders.
Right.
But what happens is that shy, unobtrusive, I don't know the word, unobtrusive, unattractive, maybe even. I don't want to mean it in a bad way, but the person that's not attracting a lot of people, there may be some potential there that you don't see. That's why you need to have really good communication with the Father, really good communication in prayer, and to not look at outer appearances immediately. There's nothing wrong with looking at outer appearances, but that shouldn't be the immediate thing you go to, because there should be investments and margin in your life for those people that are kind of on the outside. I was on the outside. Even in that church setting, I was a weird kid. I didn't believe in God. I mean, I did. I didn't believe in the Christian God. I didn't believe in the Bible at all. I didn't see things the way they saw things. I didn't sing their silly songs. I didn't do their silly those youth groups. I didn't do their silly hand movements. But there was the youth pastor saw something in me that he focused in on my awkwardness and saw that as an opportunity to preach the gospel and to offer companionship and friendship and eventually a kinship in understanding, right? And I feel like we are apt to not do that when it comes to all swaths of the society, as far as adoption of orphan children, the homeless, the mentally disabled, the elderly, you know. And I feel like that's where we need to be creating margin. We need to be creating margin for these marginalized people groups in some cases. And I'm not saying give all of your time to the homeless. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying if you have no desire to invest in some area or invest in some people for whatever reason, you naturally think, oh, they're just going to spend this money on booze. That's like the normal thing.
Right, that's right.
Right?
What if they buy drugs?
Right. What if they go and buy drugs? If that's your natural inclination, then maybe the Holy Spirit. You need to open yourself up to the idea that the Holy Spirit wants you to create some space in your life to give to things that you don't understand but may have spiritual significance. So that's where I was going with it.
Right.
And now I'm really curious how you feel about margin and marginalized. That's it. That's just go out and do whatever I just said.
Create margin for the marginalized. No, that's where I thought you were going. Like, so before we turned on the camera, you had said, like, I want to talk about the margin and address marginalized people.
Right.
And it just sounded different than, like, the way that you presented it before camera turned on.
Oh, really?
It sounded a little bit different than what we talked about yesterday, where it was just like, the impression I got was...
Well, I think yesterday we were having a specific conversation about why Christians, or not why, but how Christians don't get invested and involved in...
right, but it was around margin. Cause
right. They don't get involved in... I don't understand how Christians don't adopt children.
Right.
I understand how not every Christian is under a mandate to adopt children.
Right.
But I would say Christianity is.
Right.
Like, every Christian doesn't have to go out and adopt orphaned and abandoned children, or even single mothers who are not ready to be mothers but don't believe in abortion and know that this child's going to have to be raised in some capacity.
Right.
That should be a place that Christians rush to, and instead it's oddly this
and,
like weird, like, oh no, you've gotten pregnant before you're married. Not only are we going to shun you, but once you have that child, we also don't want to have anything
right.
to do with it.
Right. As long as we can convince
So
you.
now you're just poor and a drain on society.
Yeah, as long as we can convince you not to have the baby, our job is done. Or, I mean, to have the baby,
Right.
our job is done.
Right, because Christians spend a lot of time telling people not to have children before they're married or before they're ready.
Right.
And then they spend a lot of time avoiding the responsibility of having children when that doesn't work out the way they want it to.
Right.
It's like a weird It's just this weird space we find ourselves in. And then that's exactly what I mean by margin. Like, there's no margin for that.
Right.
You should have margin to say, hey, I live in a way financially. I've given, I've prioritized the needs of my life to where God can use my finances to be a benefit, a blessing to those who need it most. And that's like the opposite of the way things go.
We're going to talk about tithing.
Oh yeah, we're
later.
going to talk about tithing, and that's going to be. But that's the opposite. Christianity kind of teaches, actually, mess up. It's okay to mess up your finances as long as you get this one part of your finances right, whether it's tithing or whatever you want to call it.
I would actually say that they teaches without tithing, you will mess up your finances. Like
Right.
even if because even if your finances are messed up, you get this right, it'll fix things. Like the storehouse will be filled and poured out. Right? I mean, like, is that what's taught?
Yeah, that's what.
Are we going to talk about tithing now?
No, we're not going to talk about tithing now. But
Spoiler.
Spoiler alert. We're not fans. But the
margin.
That's the way they teach it.
Right.
And
So
the margin in your finances should be for the benefit of the kingdom of God, not
Right,
the benefit,
so that's-
not the benefit of an individual ministry per se. Although in some cases ministries do a really good job of being a benefit and a blessing to people. But if there are people in your life that you know of, or organizations that you know of that are struggling and could be that your finances could be used to benefit that, then and you're kind of
Believe
making
that,
excuses to get away from that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you're like, oh no, I really need to go on this vacation this year. Well, I'm not against people. You do need to take that time for yourself. I believe in that, but maybe every year isn't necessary. Maybe you skip this year and you really.
Hey, is that a dig on me?
No. You're this is like your first major
No,
vacation.
we had planned on doing it.
But I'm saying,
Every
I'm
summer.
not against you going on vacation. If you create margin for the
Right.
marginalized,
Right.
if you create space for those who have none, you know, whether it be in your home, definitely in your heart, but in your home or in your community or in your church program setting, whatever it looks like, if there's space for people to come in and find hope and find healing and find purpose and find love, then great. Then awesome. You should have that organized and prioritized in your life to where that works out. If you haven't, I'm really concerned about your commitment to the gospel as opposed to your commitment to a comfortable life.
Right. And so that's what I thought. What you said is what I thought you were talking about, and what, like, the ability, you know, because there is this marginalized group.
Right, and
I
I'm
mean,
not.
there's a
It's
lot of
not
marginalized.
all homeless.
No, there's a
I'm
lot
talking
of-
about if you're in an affluent, white, suburban, not even picket fenced. What's
do
that
vinyl
called?
fencing
What's that
nowadays.
called? Yeah, vinyl fenced. What's that? The border around your neighborhood. What's that called? The gated community. That's
Oh.
it. You know, there's an opportunity for you to reach out of that and create margin for people that are not like you.
But then you might have to have them come into your gated community.
They might come into.
That defeats the purpose of
I
the
would
gated
encourage
community.
you to get out of your gated community more than I would convert. I'm all for you inviting people in, but it's not real. Not that it's not a real experience of how Jesus manifests.
No, but I'm
and-
talking about like you talking about like giving resources and space.
Yeah.
To an unwed young mother.
So
you might have to have her come into your gated
So
community.
speaking of the life space stuff, so me and my wife lived in Florida, and we lived in not an affluent neighborhood, but I would say a predominantly middle class, upper middle class neighborhood, and we brought all these kids that my kids went to school with and got to know over time into our home, and that was great, and we, you know, there was some value in that, but there came a point where we were like, we're not living with these people, and they think the people on the inside of that were, you know, they don't know where I come from. I mean, we didn't sit down and have that long conversation, and they were looking at it like we were trying to rescue them from where they were
Right.
at, and indirectly, we were kind of signaling to them that this is where Jesus can move outside of the space where you live.
Right.
And we felt a need eventually to be where they live to show you that light
Oh, now
and
you're
hope.
now you're saying move out of the.
I'm not
gated
saying
community.
it. I'm not saying
No,
you have
that's
to.
What you said.
I'm saying we had to, but
Right.
not. I don't think everybody has to. But we had to. We had to express to people in a dark and hopeless situation that hope abounds wherever you are.
Right.
That hope can abound wherever you are. And so we moved into a. I mean, it wasn't. It was like 2 miles away, if that. But it was 2 miles into a poverty-stricken neighborhood.
Right.
And or at least that area, and that made a huge difference, and it gave us an opportunity, instead of occasionally bringing people into our lives and like they're, oh, I love your house, they come into your house and like, oh, I love your house and this is so pretty, and wow, I wish I had like a nice. Instead of that, it was we lived where they lived and they lived where we lived, and it was a daily part of our experience to have people in our homes and people kind of stepping through an area where we were just common, right? And then we could show glory and love and companionship, and me and my wife's communication and relationship that's a healthy male-female relationship that isn't predominant in that society or that part of society. Marginalized people didn't have a picture
Right.
where they lived of grace. Now, that's not entirely true, but it's partially true. And it was true enough to where it was a constant refrain from the people that came in. And so we needed to be where the marginalized were and then create margin there for them to be okay. And I'm not saying you have to do that at all. But I'm saying that there should be something in your life that is creating space for others to enter into it.
Right. And that's what I thought you were talking about, was the margin that we create in our finances, in our, in our day and week, in our perception of things, like creating margin in creating margin in the way that we perceive things.
If you're the type of person that says there's no such thing as racism today.
Oh, you're talking about race?
No. But I'm saying if you're the type of person that would say something like that,
Right.
you're not creating margin
Right.
for those who are affected by racism.
Right.
Not that, and it may be completely self-imposed in some cases, which is probably which is the case in some cases, but you're closed off. You've created a lack of margin, a lack of space for people to fit into.
Right.
And so I'm not saying
To
throw your beliefs.
to even have those conversations. I mean, like,
Right. Because once you close yourself off to that, the margin's gone,
Right.
and the opportunity for somebody to enter into that space and have an honest, hey, this has been my experience. I've been followed around in stores. I've been denied certain opportunities. I've walked into a car dealership and somebody not even talked to me for 30 minutes, right? And so, whereas if I were in a different situation and I walked to a car dealership, when I go into a car dealership with my uniform on, I'm like, there's no, like, somebody's getting the door for me. I'm not, you know what I mean? Because they're like, we know this guy's going to have to pay us. And which is, I'm not knocking that. Like, the military is awesome, so you should serve them. But there's a difference in the way certain people are treated, and that is and if you're not open, if your eyes aren't open to that, or if your eyes are automatically closed to that as a possibility, then your ability to relate to those people. But it's not just race, it's abortion. It's, oh no, this is a horrible part of our society, and this is, this is evil, and Satan has control of our law system to allow abortion. And I'm like, there are people in dire situations that you have no concept of the devastation that this is having on their inner life. And you're picketing and your closed offness to their situation, and to recognize that the complexity that goes into that kind of decision for some people, you're the reason that it gets so bad if that's the case.
Right.
And there could be an opportunity for grace to impact that situation.
And that doesn't mean change your view on whether abortion's right or not. Like,
I have not changed. I have had the same view of abortion.
But what it does
forever.
do is it creates a space to have that conversation with that person and to hear, oh, this is the hurt that's going on. This is the brokenness that's revealed in this thing that's going on in them.
Because you think it's about birth, and it's not. It's about the life of this individual and the family, and maybe this was going to be the first person that's going to graduate high school, and
now they're letting
the last
down
3 generations,
15 current family members, and
right.
And 40 extended family members, and they were going to be the one that did it for him, that got them out.
And so that just to understand the weight that's on the shoulders of people that are in any situation.
And then also it gives you the opportunity actually to shine a light into that brokenness and darkness, and to figure out how to bring healing in that space, which is the gospel.
Right.
Which
is the gospel, guys.
Standing outside of an abortion clinic and screaming at these young ladies that are trying to figure out, like, do I go do this? Not the gospel. Doesn't bring truth. Like, you're screaming truth at them, not the gospel. It's not light.
And I think that to get to the core of it, the gospel is constantly forcing me to open up margin to things that I don't like. To things that I don't agree with, or things that are kind of awkward and uncomfortable for me personally or financially or whatever. And it is a constant in my life. It has been continuous that God has helped me create that margin.
Right. So we're 25 minutes into the episode. You want to talk about, like, how are some ways that you create margin?
Right. So I would say the beginning step for me years ago, which was probably beneficial on multiple levels, not just this. Start journaling your spiritual life. If you have no concept of how much time you're devoting to what God has centered your heart on, because I don't mean to say this in a mean way. It's going to sound mean. A lot of people have this kind of God-inspired dream inside their heart, right? Inside their life. Like, your wife wants to work and help young unwed mothers. And definitely through the pre and post pregnancy phase, so that they can be on good footing. You have a desire to counsel. I have a desire to teach. We all have this thing inside of us. And what happens is we start getting connected to these different versions of ministry, these different versions of Christian practice, and that diminishes while we invest more and more in what I would call other people's vision, other people's purpose, really.
OPP.
Don't be down with that. Oh my gosh. How did we... I don't know how we got that far off from the beginning of this discussion. So, other people, you get involved in other people's ministry, and you start... And what happens is, I've seen it over and over again, definitely, especially as a leader, but you see somebody have this passion and this goal and this desire to accomplish something for the Lord, and then they get sucked into doing children's ministry. Nothing wrong with that. Love children's ministry. Everybody should have some exposure to it. But then...
At the least to let you know, I don't want to do children's ministry.
So just to find out if that's not where you belong. But then your thing gets kind of put aside. Okay, I'm being trained as a leader, and those are valuable lessons. And then you're at top of children's ministry, and they move you over to First Impressions team, or they move you over to we're starting this organization, and they need some help, and we'll pay you to do reception work or whatever. And 5 years go by, 6 years go by, 10 years go by, and this thing that you felt God created you for, God created me to be a writer, and you haven't written anything in 6 years, and that's not the margin. That's not the space that you should have been creating. And so you really, when you say practical steps to get margin in your life, I think not first and foremost, definitely be in community. That's probably the biggest thing. If you're in a community of people that encourage you, but I say a very practical way. If you're not there yet, if you don't have people that will tell you, "Hey, man, are you following the passion that God put inside of you?" Like, that's what community should be doing, equipping you and training you and releasing you to go do that stuff. But if you don't have community yet, a healthy first step, start journaling how much. Start journaling and I don't mean like journaling, here's what I did today. Nothing wrong with that. But specifically saying, man, I devoted 3 hours to writing, because I'm a writer. God told me I'm a writer and I'm going to write. So I devoted 3 hours. I only got 10 paragraphs down, or 6 words down. I mean, we've gone to write and not written anything for a while. But I devoted 3 hours, and I gave them to the Lord and said, this belongs to you. Do what you want with it. And those 3 sentences are going to be the foundation of probably your first book or your first novel or whatever. You need to start journaling that. You need to start cultivating and writing down the things that God's put inside of you. even if you don't fully know what it is. Because I once you start writing it down, I mean, for me anyway, once you start writing it down, it's kind of nonstop. It's like this
It comes out.
pages and pages of it's ridiculous looking back now, but it was the foundation of where I'm at now. So that's a practical step of starting to create margin, because you'll start to realize I have not as much time as I'm in church or I'm doing ministry work. The things that God created me for, I'm not investing in. Or maybe you'll find out you are, and then that'll help you.
So really, I mean,
organize correctly.
journaling becomes a part. Like really, the benefit in that is just identifying where your time is going.
Right.
Like identifying.
Because years go by. I mean,
Right.
I being a Christian so long, a week of kind of avoiding the responsibility that God puts on your life turns into a month of avoiding it, turns into a year of avoiding it. And you're like, I don't know how many, especially, I don't know what it is about the mid-20s, but I don't know how many mid-20-year-olds, like 25, 24, 26-year-old people I've talked to, and they're like, I thought I wanted to do youth ministry, but here I am. I've been in the worship band for 8 years. I don't know what happened. I'm like, how in the world? That's why you need to kind of keep track of that. You can't just, I'll get to it, or God will provide a way. True, He will, but not mostly because you're not paying attention.
Right.
Eventually. Or not, mostly because you are paying attention to it. That's when He provides the way. I was looking for the road or the map or the thing that God was going to use, and that's where it was. If you're not looking for it, you're probably not going to find it.
So journaling will help you identify
Journaling is
where
a
you're
very
actually putting your
practical
time.
step.
And really, I mean, it's a time budget. Like
It does a lot of secondary things. It
Come
does.
out of that.
Yeah, out of journaling is a healthy habit, and if you read what's his name, Wilkerson, he the spiritual disciplines on spiritual disciplines. It is a spiritual discipline that is, I can't say I don't know any. I know very few Christians in long-term ministry who don't journal in some form. In some format, they are writing down what's going on in their life, what has gone on in their life, and then kind of what they're aiming. Yeah, what they're aiming for.
So
that is a very practical, very simple thing to get you to that place where margin can be created. Because if not, you're not going to know. You're going to be like, most people think they don't have time for anything. And actually, most people have time for a lot of nothing.
Right.
I do. Right now, I have a lot of time for nothing.
We have so much time for a lot of nothing that we are recording an episode.
Sure.
So financially, I think that there's things that you can do there too. Like even if because you're in that, you may be in that place where you're like, I literally like live paycheck to paycheck. I have so it becomes one of these things where you just put, okay, I have $5 extra this week, and I'm gonna put this aside because I know that somebody's gonna need this $5.
Right.
Hey, I came into, tax return showed up and I'm going to pay off my bills, but I'm also going to put away $300 because I know that this will become beneficial. So it's starting somewhere. And realizing and put it into your button. And it's first, get a budget. Second, put it into your budget.
A budget is a journal for money.
Right. And a journal is a budget for time.
Yeah, exactly. Guys, full circle. We're always thinking here.
So put that so that at least you're putting something away, and when it comes up and your friend's like, man, because it's happened, and hey, like, man, I'm not gonna make it on gas until payday, and you're like, I have $20,
and I think it's key to recognize that it's proportional to where you're at. If you're poor, I don't say poor, if you are in a place where you're living paycheck to paycheck and financially things are difficult, most likely many of the people you know are in the same position.
Right.
Because you're going to associate with that kind of the world that you relate in, right? And those people are going to be. And so think of how much it would benefit you for one day somebody to come in and just not come in. You're at the gas station and you're down to like your last $5. And somebody just to come and give you $20 for gas.
Right.
Think of what an impact that would have. Now, to most people, I mean, $20 of gas, okay. whatever. But to that person
that needs $20 in gas,
that's their kid getting to daycare tomorrow,
right?
So that they can get to job,
to
so they can get to
Right.
work, so that paycheck that's still 5 days away can be some substantial.
So creating margin in your finances,
And that's what you're creating margin for.
creating margin in your finances is literally just creating some space, even if it's small space,
Right.
Even if it's just a small amount of
Yeah.
space,
And being open to it,
and
not being closed off to it.
right. So, we're recording, so
People are walking around.
Yeah.
Nobody, no concern for any. No, I'm just kidding.
but Riley's typically pretty loud when she walks in the door, so I need to say.
Dramatic? Is she popping in like the fun has arrived?
She's
Or the fun is O'Reilly.
Anyway, so I probably created a bigger distraction.
Right, I think you made a bigger deal. She was actually being careful
And now
about
there's
it.
people knocking at her door.
She was actually being careful about it. You were.
Anyway, so hi, we're recording an episode. You can come in.
It's all right.
Anyway, so margin, really creating margin is just even starting at this little bit, right? Mm-hmm. And then I think that the most important thing, or one of the biggest things, like when we talk about marginalized people, this kind of, and we've talked about this kind of gets into calling and like, and here's what I've been telling people for a long time. I remember even when I was back in Cheyenne, these two leaders in youth ministry, and they were getting ready to get married, and we were talking, and they were talking about calling, and I was like, look, we're all called as Christians. We're literally called to just a couple things, and it's all the same. Like we're all called to the same thing, right? So like we're called to love each other, and inside of that, it builds the framework for loving God, loving our neighbor, and making disciples. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to flesh that out more in depth. But we're all called to that. That, as Christians, our calling.
Got it.
When you settle on that, even if you don't know how to do it well, but when you settle on that and you're like, I'm going to try, I'm going to work these things out. I'm going to let God work these things out of me. I understand them as my calling. God will direct you towards a people to do that with, right? A community to do that with, to love each other. And he will direct you to, hey, go do this with youth. Hey, go do this with unwed mothers. Hey, go do this with the homeless. And one of the best places for that to work out is in community. And we've talked about that. So you get into community and all of a sudden you guys start dreaming and you start talking vision. And you
find your mission.
You start talking about mission. And all of a sudden, as a group, you're like, man, we want to do this. And now you're spurring each other on to create that time, that space inside your life.
Or as the Bible says, spurring each other on to good works.
Right.
Of ministry.
Right.
Because that's what God wants.
Right.
The Father's heart is encapsulated in finding these people that are broken and hurt in your
immediate
sphere.
space.
Yeah, in your space. And it's not that the homeless person is interrupting your day. It's that God created them to be there so that your margin can start filling in that place where they don't feel welcome.
Right.
And it's not that God, has
and I would
cursed
say
some people
that your margin creates space for them to feel welcome.
Right.
And accepted in. You can go into their space, but it's also about opening your space to allow them into. And so really I live in Nampa, Idaho. Boise's 30 minutes away. I love Boise. I'd love to spend all my time in downtown Boise, in a loft above a coffee shop, get rid of my car, and just
that's what I'm aiming at.
and just walk around and do that.
But instead,
but that's not my space.
Right.
That's not my space. My proximity. What's approximated to where I am is Nampa, Idaho, and I'm going to do those things in Nampa, Idaho that with the people that are here. I'm not going to go into Boise. So start where you're at and trying to find the marginalized that comes. You start asking God, show me those people. Maybe it starts by knocking on the door of the person next door, or being with a group of people and talking about maybe people are going to know people that have needs.
Right, and I want to be careful. I don't think that you should give. I don't think that your life should be full of marginalized people. I don't think it's not like I'm saying go into a space where all you have are marginalized people and give everything to them. I'm not saying that at all. I think missionaries are called to something similar to that. Right. But even that, then God uses.
But missional work,
but the missional work of your life
is a little bit different.
Right.
Than
that you need to have something. Some exposure to marginalized people, some exposure to marginalized situations, and things that are forced outside of your comfort and normalcy.
And I would say the goal in that is to draw them into a place where they do not feel marginalized anymore.
Right.
Where
they're not special projects. They are people.
Right.
Right. That Jesus died for. People that God desires to build relationship and reconciliation with.
So you're not just trying to go feed the homeless. You're trying to expose this group of people that you're spending time with to the gospel.
If your goal is to just feed the homeless, then you could just go feed the homeless.
Right. And you don't even have to.
You literally don't have to interact with anybody.
But that's not the goal. The goal is to create space in your life to invite them into, so that they can see the light of Christ and be drawn by it.
Right. When we moved to Florida, there was discussion about whether we were going to live on base or live downtown. And we had spent the 3 years prior to moving to Florida living in what essentially a gated community, literally with guns. Guards. But we lived in this kind of protected area, and then we had friends who lived downtown who were constantly having this influx of people in and out of their homes and lives, and we were like, no, that's kind of what we're aiming towards. And
I mean, so much so that I was in the same boat where I was like, man, I can't effectively do this if I live on base, because the people I want to spend time with, that I want to be with, can't get on base.
Right.
Like there's guards that are like, no,
you can't be here.
You can't come on base.
And so that's a kind of a symbol, though. We chose to live in a place where people could interrupt our normalcy. And it wasn't like all the time, 100% of the time, people who needed us were around us. That's not the case. Because I think there are people that we needed that were not always around us, that we would go to and say, hey, we don't know exactly how to deal with this situation or this circumstance or this financial problem or whatever, and there was opportunity to come in and out of it. And I think that's what margin is. Margin isn't something, it's something that may be always there, but it doesn't have to be this wide gaping hole that everybody kind of runs in. Yeah, right? That it's space on the side that's specifically there for things that need to be there, or things that could come up.
And we're gonna, again, we're still wrapping this up, we're gonna talk about what that looks like in the framework of love each other, because that's like loving each other is that's
this kind of connective tissue.
Right. And then loving God and loving your neighbor and making disciples, like these things are all margin spaces that you're filling to invite them into that connective tissue of loving each other.
I think for Christians, you can break it down to when you're first experiencing what it's like to know God, to find out who God is and what He's about. You make a lot of margin, I feel like, in your mental space to say, there's a lot of unknown.
Right.
And I don't know how I fit into all that.
And in your time. Because
there
wasn't a time that I read the Bible more.
Yeah.
There wasn't a time that I, right or wrong or sad or whatever. But there wasn't a time that I prayed more. There wasn't a time that I sought out connection with other people that were Christians that could tell me. I was at every church event. Like I was looking to be, and I made that time. Like I created that margin.
So that God could enter that space, and then because God was, I would say there was a time in my life when God was a marginal part. God, even though looking back, He was probably a bigger part than I thought at the time. But I had forced God to say, "Hey, I don't really care about this spiritual stuff. Is kind of nonsensical to me, and it has no real bearing on my life. And so I want to pursue other things that are more important to me." And then as I became more aware of spiritual stuff, the more exposed to a spiritual world, I started creating margin for that, right? And then so much so that it actually became the predominant part of my life for a long, long time. And now I have this kind of mode of being, and in that mode of being, I have financial margin, Well, actually, my wife has financial margin. I have veto power.
Right.
So,
Which doesn't often get used.
which doesn't. It's reserved for the things that are necessary. But I have relational margin. I have a set of friends that I talk to often and bounce ideas off of, and that's my core space that makes sense to me. But even outside of that, there's room for other people to come in with different ideas that are not Reformed theologians, that are not Orthodox thinkers, that can. There's room for them. And there's room for them to even challenge my ideas without me flipping out and saying, no, I just shut up. I don't want to hear anything you have to say. And atheists, there's a huge space in my life for atheists where for a long time there wasn't. I was like, yeah, whatever. Nobody cares what atheists think. Atheists don't even care what atheists think. but now there's a lot of room for people to speak into that. And I appreciate that more and more. And so that's relational, and then I said financial, relational, spiritually, physically. I live in a very small space now, but I try to be in spaces that are going to allow room for people to say what they want to say and feel how they feel, not feel how they want to feel, but feel how they feel, and then
we bought our house.
Find out where the gospel fits in.
Like we bought our house for that purpose. Like when we were looking for houses, we were like, people can fit here. People can come here. There's a space for kids to play. There's a space for people to be in our life. And then we've set our home up to welcome people into that space because we want to make it available. But we'll go to other people's house too. Like
right.
And we'll go to other
places.
And
that's part of margin is that I know that a lot of people get caught up in the home church or home space.
Like, no, you come here.
Home space movement, and they're like, you get so comfortable where you're at. But really part of margin is like, I'll go into your mess.
Right.
I'm okay with other people in my mess because my mess is kind of minimal.
And that's hard.
Is kind of minimal.
But that's hard too because people are like, no, my house can't. Like, no, we'll go hang out there.
Yeah.
Like, I understand if you don't want us to because you're afraid we're going to be McJudgy pants or whatever. But I want to be where you're at. Like, so anyway, so that's.
Yep. That's what I mean. So when I say we need to be creating margin for marginalized people, marginalized places, marginalized systems. That's where the margin in our life needs to make room.
And just kind of like to be clear, maybe that means that you take in a 15-year-old girl who's pregnant and she lives with you for the next 5 years. Like maybe that means that. Maybe that means you're the church in Texas or Louisiana or whatever.
We're not saying years ago. We're not saying that's everybody.
Everybody in the church adopted a baby. Right. You know, like maybe that's what happens, but maybe not. Maybe you're the ones that like we had friends that. People just coming through and they're like, oh, you need a place to stay, and they'll just let them stay in their house. Maybe that's what happens.
But if it's not happening at all, that's where I really do want to focus on that. If there's no margin in your life for people who think differently than you, smell differently than you, look differently than you, act differently than you, and expect differently than you, it's potential that you've purposefully filled your life with things so that those people don't have to exist in your world.
Right. So, think about it.
Think about it, Christians. And non-Christians too, but
mostly Christians.
Especially Christians.
Because we're talking to.
Yeah, I feel like Christians just take it for granted that, I'm doing what God wants me to do by going to church and giving the money and smiling whenever I don't really want to.
Coffee on Monday, or on Sunday morning.
Yeah, and missing out on this kind of thing that God's doing in the real world away from church.
Yeah. So,
buildings.
Cool. So as we go on, we're going to talk about some of those things. We'll talk more about discipleship making and
this is fun. I like this arc too. I think this is going to be fun to talk about life space stuff.
And actually, we do have some really good episodes that will be coming up in that place, like in that arc. So next week might be culture again, but it might be church.
Yeah, it might do church life.
So it might be personal, or the life space stuff again. So we love your comments or your questions,
your feedback.
Feedback.
You're like, I don't need margarine for anything.
I don't need margarine. I use butter. If you're keto, you use butter. Or ghee. Is that what you
Sure.
ghee? Ghee.
It's butter. It's refined butter.
I can't believe it's not butter.
No, it's butter. It's more butter than that butter.
Oh, it's the buttery of the butterest. Anyway, so we love all that. We do have a Twitter.
Cool.
We do have a Twitter. It's odd_show, and I put that at the end of everything. Thomas as
Thomas at Blenderzen.
no, Thomas is at BlenderZen, and like blender, like the thing Zen at the end of it, which I never asked you where that came from, but another time. I'm bpags2, and you can follow and comment. And
We'll say some
add us.
interesting, crazy stuff.
Mostly. All right, that's it. Stay odd.
Stay out.
Thanks for checking out The Odd Show. You can follow Bruce on Twitter at bpags2 and Thomas at BlenderZen. Remember to rate and review us on iTunes and share us with your friends. Until next time, stay odd.